Hello and welcome back to Life from the Wrist. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be looking at a really beautiful IWC time-only automatic from 1950. Many brands can point to a single moment in their history that changed the trajectory of their companies. Brands like IWC can point to multiple such moments, but movement development can often be a catalyst for great change. As the title suggests of this video and article, the Caliber 85 was really the start of an important era of watchmaking for IWC, and the story of automatic movements predates IWC's Caliber 85. And I think the history of IWC's sort of automatic movements can be documented pretty well. There's a really great article written by David Seyffer that sort of documented the history of the automatic movement. And I'm going to read just a couple of quotes from it because I think it's helpful to ground sort of where the Caliber 85 is in the general history of the automatic movement. So all that I'll be saying going forward here is quoted. A watch that can wind itself. It was a dream, and at the same time a technical challenge that had occupied watchmakers since the 18th century. Historians are still not in agreement as to whom the concept of self-winding watch can be ascribed. On one hand, there are those who credit the Swiss watchmaker Abraham-Louis Perrelet with the invention of the automatic winding for pocket watches in 1777. Others claim that Hubert Sarton, a watchmaker born in Liège, could have been the father of this technology and presented it in 1778. Be that as it may, the idea was born, but the technology failed to make its mark on pocket watches. And so he continues with his description where he kind of describes where automatic movements sort of began in wristwatches as opposed to pocket watches, which is what Perrelet or Sarton were innovating on. Of course, many watchmakers started to play around with their own methods of creating self-winding systems after the first patent was applied for and granted in 1924. And so there were many different patents that had come out. World War II really had its effect on the development of these movements, and there were some brands that launched their own self-winding movements, like the Felsa Caliber 629 and the Longines 22A. These movements became so sought after that and I'm referring to automatic movements, became so sought after that over 200 patents for automatic movements were granted from 1944 to 1955. IWC obviously had a horse in the race, and I'll use Seyffer's words to sort of describe the process of developing the movement. Historians and developments were reflected in a similar way at IWC, which had remained loyal to the classic hand-winding system through the 1930s. But then, in 1944, Hubert Sarton took over as technical director at IWC, and by May 1945 had already started on the development of an IWC automatic wristwatch. The project went by the name Montre 62 Automatique. As a manufacturer of high-quality timepieces, the company on the Rhine had a strong interest in making a self-winding watch for its customers. And Hubert Sarton, IWC had appointed a technical director who was not only capable of handling the design of an automatic movement, but also would be able to organize its series production with required precision. His first design ideas bore fruit. On the 14th of June 1946, a first sketch of an IWC automatic watch, mécanisme de remontage automatique à mesolette, excuse my French here, mazelote oscillante pour mouvement de montre à remontoir, was patented under the number 25478 in Switzerland. Peloton had revived an idea first hatched in 1780, which foresaw the transfer of energy via two poles. In principle, this mechanism was a solution based on very sound technology, but there was still room for improvement. Albert Peloton continued to work on modifications to the design, mainly with the view of obtaining a complete revolution and guaranteeing optimum shock absorption for the rotor. The result was another patent dated 7 June 1950 under the number 284841. Effectively, it marked the birth of the Peloton winding system that has remained such a central feature of IWC's automatic movements to this day. The first movement so I hope that sort of describes automatic movements in the context of IWC well and gives you a historical context for who sort of is really responsible for this innovation. The first movement that was to go into production was the Caliber 81, an automatic movement with a subsidiary seconds hand. According to IWC records, 1,800 numbers were reserved for the movement, but there's no record of a sale, so it can be assumed that it never really went into serial production. The brand shifted focus to the Caliber 85, which had a center seconds version of their automatic movement, and this went into production and launched in 1950. The watch today, and I apologize that it took us this long to get into this specific piece, but I think the introduction hopefully helped. The watch today is an example of where the Caliber 85 was used. This specific watch was manufactured in 1950, and based on the serial number on this watch, making it an extremely early execution of the famous automatic caliber. This time-only piece from IWC comes in a 35mm case that's made of stay bright steel, based on the case back stamp marking that describes the case metal of this piece. The case is in good condition, I would say. Obviously, when you get a steel case, you're going to see some of the scratches on it, but I think it's in overall good condition. The lugs are really where this watch stands out, and as you can see, they have these really beautiful Bombé, or what collectors call twisted, design to them. I recommend that you check out an article that was written by Goldammer that's called A Collector's Guide to IWC Caliber 89, Exceptional Lugs and Cases. I think it describes a lot of the different cases that IWC use in many of their watches. Obviously, the Caliber 89 is the manual wind versions of watches that they produced, but this case is also used in some of those pieces. The watch has a white dial that's aged to sort of, as you can see, this sort of cream tone. It has applied hour markers that match the hours, minutes, and seconds hands. As you can see, the minutes hand actually is missing some of its luminescent material. To some collectors, this is a big no-no. Others, I think it's quite intriguing. And then, as you can see, IWC has printed their name in cursive on the top of the dial. As discussed, and I encourage you to check out the article that we've written about this piece, because we have some images of the movement. The watch runs in the Caliber 85 automatic movement. The movement is actually signed with patent applied, which indicates it's one of the earliest versions of the Caliber 85 that was produced. It's likely that the movement was produced before the patent was awarded to IWC, and I think it was very common practice by companies to ensure that copycats from stealing the designs that they had developed and created. The movement operates extremely smoothly. This is likely credited to the Peloton winding system, where there's actually rollers that oscillate between an eccentric cam, which causes 2 clicks to ratchet against the sawtoothed winding wheel. So I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this, but you can kind of hear the clicks as you move the watch around, you can actually hear the rotor moving in different directions. It's believed that in 1950 and 1951, 8,400 caliber 85s were produced before IWC improved on the design with the caliber 852 that was launched in 1952. One of the interesting parts of this watch is that instead of accessing the movement from the case back, which you would typically just snap off the case back of these watches, you actually access it, the movement's actually front loaded. So in order to access the movement, you basically have to remove the crystal of this watch, unscrew the crown, and then you can remove the movement from its case. As mentioned before, the case back is stamped with the IWC name, logo, case serial, and Stay Bright steel, which is a steel alloy used heavily by watch brands during this time. Again, there will be pictures of both the case back as well as the movement if you want to take a look at it. For me, the 35mm case is extremely wearable. Being that the lugs are long and quite large, they extend considerably from the wrist, making it sit larger. They also carry quite a bit of presence, which I think helps make the watch not fade deeply into a shirt cuff, which can be helpful if one is looking for something to wear every day that doesn't feel like a traditional dress watch. So if you look at the watch on my wrist, again, it's a 35mm case, but I think it actually fits really, really nicely. The lugs make it extend quite close to the edges of my wrist, and I think it looks incredibly attractive. We have had the pleasure of covering another IWC on the channel, which was a rose gold version of the manual wind caliber 89 IWC, but it had a very similar design in the lugs. I think the case was a little bit larger as well, but the lug design was really incredibly attractive and something that I really enjoyed. I'd actually say, in my opinion, the steel case of this watch is in better condition. You can still sort of see a lot of the different edges on the lugs. I felt like the rose gold version, and we mentioned this in our coverage of that watch, was not as sharp, especially on the twisted lugs, and I think it looks really nice. This is a really nice example. I also don't think that there were holes on the case of the rose gold version, so you can switch out straps a lot easier on this piece, but I don't believe the other one had a holes case. Experiencing a history-defining watch can often feel overwhelming, and while this piece doesn't maybe jump out to you as such, this watch really is history-defining. I think it's especially overwhelming when this was really the birth of such an important piece of technology, which was an automatic movement for IWC. Being that this is likely an early version of the caliber 85, I think that sort of adds an additional layer of why this watch is so special. And one of the things that is, I think, attractive to me is that all of this history is wrapped up into such an incredibly attractive watch. And this is an incredibly well-designed watch and makes this watch, in my opinion, really worthwhile. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this IWC from 1950. As I mentioned in the video, this is a really, quite a historic watch when you think about it. It's got a very early version of an automatic movement that really became the staple for IWC going forward, and a really beautiful watch in design, which I think is also really important when you're considering watches. To me, I think vintage IWC is grossly underappreciated, and something that I hope that creating videos like this will bring more attention to such an important part of collecting vintage watches, and hopefully you learned a little bit of something about the history of IWC. If you have a vintage IWC, let me know in the comments section below which one you have. I'd love to hear about the piece. Let me know what you think about this watch and the caliber 85 from IWC. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. As always, there will be an article on lifeonthewrist.com. It will be the first description in the video where we write about this piece. You can also see some more pictures of the watch, its movement, case back, etc. on that in that article, so be sure to head to the first link in the description. Lastly, if you wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help me out. With this said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.